nuclear component, doesn't look at other aspect of Iran behavior. If you take my opinion, I think there were 4 flaws. First flaw is in the logic, because the US was thinking with the logic that, if Iran has sanctions are lifted, if they are provided with economic perks, with economic incentive, they will forget about ideology. This logic doesn't apply with Iran because it's a system based on ideology. The ideology is needed for the survival of the system. I mean, Khomeini used to say, when they used to ask him about the economy, he used to tell them, we didn't start the Islamic revolution to slash the price of watermelon. Yeah. So that's why people, I have American friends who were like, amazed after Iran received so much money from the US, they were saying in the Friday prayer, death to America, and they would be saying, why is that? Why are they, cursing us? We just gave them billions and dollars. Well, actually, that's exactly why they are cursing you, because they don't want to seem that they gave up on ideology because of some economic incentives. That's the first one, is the logic that, the problem is the US think that that Iran, and this is general, that Iran follows the same logic they follow. And that's not true. Iran, they have their own logic. The second problem was the time frame. The American assumption was, if the economy opens up and private investor will come, then, the regime grip, the regime has a grip on the people. All the major projects have to go through something called Khatam al-Anbiya, which is a major conglomerate. If the economy opens up for international investment, the regime will change. That's true. The regime will change, but when? There was a cover of a magazine in 2015 for the Time magazine saying Iran 2025, showing a beautiful Iranian girl. Well, the region could not wait 10 years and could not bear and tolerate Iran behavior for 10 years, waiting for this change to happen. The third flaw, I think, is in the content, which I said before, it's just only look to the nuclear, where the security threat for the Gulf, for the US allies, comes also from the ballistic missile. And the most important threat comes from the non-state actor, from the proxies that are trained by Iran. And the fourth flaw, which is like the major flaw, was the fact that the deal was done behind the back of the US long-term allies, mainly Saudi Arabia. And this contributed to instability in the region. These were the main flaws.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the regional input was not a part of this deal, even though we are neighbors with Iran, we are living with them throughout history, and to not consider the regional input, it leaves a big question mark, you could say.
Yeah, of course. And also it led to instability. Well, because also Obama wanted a quick gain, a quick win, policy win. Don't forget, initially he started with the peace process and didn't go far. Syria didn't go far. So he wanted to focus, his policy focus was on Iran. He wanted a quick win. He thought if he introduced the Saudi, things will get more complicated. But actually not including the Saudis, the Emirati, the Gulf, it rendered them more insecure. And this insecurity, and each one felt it needs to fend off for itself. And that's why you see now front formation, and this is very dangerous. We have to remember that First World War was the result of this front formation. Then one event can cause a war. Yeah. So the fact that the region was not involved contributed to instability, their insecurity of Gulf state, and it contributed to instability.
Absolutely. Now that you've clarified the different flaws of the original nuclear deal, well, what do you think could have been done differently?
Well, to start with, it should have started with Saudi Arabia. It should have started because there was in an article, there was an interview that President Obama did with The Atlantic, with Jeff Goldberg. And Obama said, well, the Saudi have to learn how to share the region with Iran. So his point of view was, we focus on the nuclear deal and then they sort it out.
Yeah.
And this was, again, a wrong logic. The way Obama should have done it, he should have put the Saudis and the Iranian and moderated between both of them to solve their issue, at least what they see as security threat, and then went into a deal. This would have been much better and much more sustainable.
Absolutely. And now we see the closing of Trump's administration, and we saw the different policies that his administration has enacted for this region, and it's had a lot of consequences and of the such. So how would you evaluate Trump's attitudes towards the nuclear deal?
Well, listen, the point is, President Trump is a real estate developer.
Yes,
you know, in New York,
he's very famous for that.
Very, very aggressive. So, you know, President Trump used to say, when you deal with someone, before you close the deal with him, you punch him in the nose. So this might work if you're working with a cement supplier, but not necessarily working with Iran. What he was thinking, first of all, he was thinking the deal was not working. Iran was not behaving. So let me pull. This is a bad deal. I'll pull out of it. And he could pull out of it because it was a deal done by executive order, not by a resolution by the Congress. So he pulled out of it. He put maximum pressure. And what he was thinking, that the Iranian, when he puts them under pressure, they will call him and they will try to negotiate him down. And he can pull with them a better deal. Well, again, this is not the logic that Iranians follow. You know, the Iranian are carpet makers.
And they're very excellent carpets, yes.
Yeah, they're very patient and very calm. They never do anything out of reaction. Everything is well thought of.
Calculated.
So yes, so they had the strategic patience and they waited Trump out and they held to their ground. So Trump could have done, and another thing, you know, pulling out unilaterally, this put him in confrontation. I mean, this created a point of contention with the European, where to solve Iran as a problem, you need multilateralism, you need the help of the European. Don't forget, the European tried to put a certain mechanism called Intex, you know, to go around the sanction. So the point is, he put maximum pressure on them and he did not offer them the alternative. Exactly. He should have offered them the alternative, yes. So that's why it was not productive. It did not produce what Trump wanted, which is to get the Iranian, call him and ask for another deal or ask to negotiate.
You know, you used a very interesting analogy of the Iranians there as carpet makers. Yes. They have a lot of patience. And we see this a lot also in their negotiation tactics. You see them delaying a lot of key elements of the negotiation process in order to increase sort of the carrots, as you will, or the gains yes. that they can get from the negotiation period. You know, it's very interesting. So with all this information in mind, and especially since Joe Biden, he has a strong background in foreign affairs. After all, he served for years in the committee in the Senate. So do you think the Biden administration will be able to deliver on this promise of returning to the Jcpoa? Or do you see perhaps any hurdles that they might encounter?
Well, I think there is many hurdles. First of all, I mean, let's speak about the deal itself. The deal itself, why Trump was able to get out of it? Because it was an executive order. It was not ratified by Congress. It's not a treaty. If it was a treaty, Trump could have not gotten out of it without the Congress getting out of it. Now, if we look to the American Congress, the Senate, the Democrat, they have 46 senators. And you have two independent that caucus with the Democrats. That means they vote with the Democrat. The American law says, you know, the Senate is 100 people, 100 seats, yeah?
Yep.
If you have 50-50, then the Senate goes to the president and the VP becomes the head of the Senate, which means the Democrats have to win 2 seats. And now in January, there is a runoff for Georgia, where are 2 seats up for grabs. Will the Democrats be able to get 2 seats from Georgia, which is ruby red Republican state? I don't know, but if they get 1, the Senate, if they get 1 or 0, the Senate will be Republican, and it will be difficult because Foreign Minister Zarif, a few days ago, he was in Med 2020, in Rome.
Yeah.
He was speaking, and he said we need to make sure if the US goes back to the nuclear deal, it doesn't leave again. It's not a revolving door. They go when they want, they achieve their purpose, and then they leave. We need to make sure they're there for good. And this is a problem, and this will present really a hurdle for President Biden, because if the Senate is Republican, they won't ratify the deal. And the most he can do is an executive order like Obama, and this might not satisfy the Iranians. That will not satisfy the Iranians. So that's the first hurdle he has. Plus, he has another hurdle now that, he has said that I will stop Iran activities. He said malignant, he called it malignant activities. What if the Iranian stood there, held their ground and said, we don't want to change anything? Will he go back to the initial deal, or he would say no? I mean, it will not be, going back to the deal will not be as easy as you think.
Yeah, I mean, you presented that very clearly. You have different issues both at the local US level, the federal level, and also within the regional level as well. So there's a lot of obstructions that can make this campaign promise to return back to the JCPOA more problematic for his administration. But if that's the case, so it's always good to look at a glass half full and half empty scenario. So we looked at the half empty. So now let's try to look at the half full. What can the Biden administration do to have a constructive approach towards Iran and to hash out some sort of deal?
Well, there is a saying in Arabic, in أردت أن تطاع فاطلب المستطاع. If you wanted to be obeyed or to followed, so ask something feasible. Okay? Yeah. We have 3 issues with Iran. Okay, let's say Saudi, the Arab Gulf. We have 3 issues with Iran. I mean, even the European. One issue is the nuclear. This should be solved with a nuclear deal. And Iran has no problem to go back to it, is the sanctions are lifted. The second issue, which is the ballistic missile program. He has long-range ballistic missile program. And the third issue, which is the most crucial issue, which is the non-state actor, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the National Defense Forces, you name it, the Hashd, all across the region. So let's go one by the one. We said the nuclear deal, the nuclear issue can be solved with a nuclear deal. The second issue, which is ballistic missile, this is problematic. Why? Because if you talk to Iranian, again, to solve any issue, you have to put in the other person's shoe. We cannot think from our perspective, from our logic. We have to think in their logic. You know what the Iranian tells you? I mean, even Iranian who are not necessarily pro-regime, they say every country has the right to have his own missile. Saudi has missiles, UAE have missiles, South Africa, any country has the right to defend itself. And Khamenei, what he tells them? Look at Saddam Hussein. When he destroyed his stock of missiles, Sumud, this is when the American invaded him. This brings us to the third point. The problem is not really with the missiles, because, if Iran, God forbid, today throws missiles on Saudi, then it will be declaring war. Then it will be bearing the consequence. The real problem of the missiles, not because they're long range, the problem is the fact that these missiles can go to non-state actors and Iran can wash their hands away. And this happened, in 2019 on the Aramco facilities. Houthis said we threw it, but all the experts said it was coming from Iraq.
Iran, yeah.
And Iran said it's not my problem. I didn't throw anything. Nothing came from Iran. So I think where we should work on, where Biden can have a constructive dialogue with the Iranian, is to work on the non-state actor. And Trump, we go back to Trump. Trump, you remember that Foreign Minister Pompeo, he had 12 conditions on, he put 12 conditions and he announced them from the Heritage Foundation. These 12 conditions were a non-starter. He thought, I will put a maximalist position and they will negotiate me down. One of the conditions was that Iran cuts all its ties, all the funding to all the non-state actors. Well, this will not happen. Why? I'll tell you why. Because Iran, the relation between Iran and the non-state actor is not a partnership or is not transactional. These non-state actors, Hezbollah, these are extension of the Revolutionary Guard. They've been nurturing them for decades, ideologically, economically, and militarily, and training them. It's like a mother and her children. You cannot ask a mother to give up on her children. The best what we can ask them, the Iranian, is to pacify these proxies. What I mean to pacify, and I'll give you two examples, one in Lebanon with Hezbollah and one in Yemen with the Houthis. Listen, now Lebanon in its very, very difficult condition and Hezbollah in a very precarious condition. People are blaming Hezbollah for protecting the corrupt elite. They're blaming Hezbollah for the very difficult economic situation. So I think what can President Biden do, President-elect Biden do, is tell Iran, tell Hezbollah to calm down. And I will pressure, because Hezbollah, where's the threat for Hezbollah? The threat, Hezbollah, comes from Israel. And I will pressure Israel to give guarantees that it will not Hezbollah. How can this be done? Hezbollah also, you have to put yourself in Hezbollah's shoes. Hezbollah has put 4 conditions to lay down its arm, because Israel has a threat from Hezbollah because of its arsenal. They say Hezbollah has high precision missiles. Hezbollah has put four conditions because to lay down its arm or to put its arm under the custody of the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces. The first one is for the army to be strong enough. The army now is strong enough. It's been equipped by the American with billions of dollars. Number 2 is to have a prisoner exchange. The last exchange was done in 2006. The third condition, which is for Israel to give a landmine map, because they did put mines in the south. Well, this is irrelevant because the south have been cleared from all the mines. So the fourth condition, which is for Israel to leave all Lebanese land, which include the Jcpoa farms. Jcpoa farm is a very tiny piece of land. So here, President Biden can go tell Iran, tell Hezbollah to put his arm under the custody of the left, and I will pressure Israel to to define its northern borders with Lebanon, to withdraw from Jcpoa, and to sign a non-aggression treaty, non-aggression pact with Lebanon that doesn't include normalization, doesn't include diplomatic exchange. And Israel commits that it will not hit any target in Lebanon, and vice versa. Lebanon commits that nothing will come out of Lebanon hitting Israel. So this will prevent a war, will prevent a hit on Hezbollah, and at the same time will secure Israel. So it will offer Hezbollah a security that it will not be hit by Israel, hit its personnel. Now in Lebanon, I was 2 weeks ago in Lebanon, two weeks ago in Lebanon, and everyone was so worried that Israel might hit. There were talks that they were planning to target the Secretary General of Hezbollah. So a deal like that will provide security, the survival of Iran proxy, and at the same time, security for the ally of the US. And I think this kind of deal goes with the Biden strategy, because Biden doesn't want a heavy footprint, doesn't want to deploy a lot of soldiers in the region. He follows Obama and he follows Trump in this. But at the same time, he wants to still have a role, still have influence in the region. So this is where he can be a guarantor, play the role of the guarantor, play the role of the broker, and this can de-escalate the tensions in the region. Another example would be Yemen. You know, in 2016, the Houthis, the Kuwaiti did a great job with bringing the Yemeni together, and the Houthis agreed. But then when they went to Sada and they talked to their sponsor, the Iranian, they went back to fighting. So here where President Biden can again tell the Iranian, tell the Houthis to stop fighting and to negotiate with the government of Mr. Hadi, and then they will also speak with the Saudi and tell them, please tell Mr. Hadi, because Saudi is the main sponsor of the legitimate government of Yemen, tell them to give a fair share. You have to give, tell Mr. Hadi that he needs to give a fair share of power to the Houthis. So I think these type of arrangement will de-escalate the tension and will create stability.
Yeah, I mean,
and it will be a starting point for a bigger deal, a larger deal with Iran.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the intention, that we want stability in this region. It's very high intention for a very long time. So perhaps the U.S. can assume this guarantor role for the region and help mediate the different conflicts across the region, whether it's in Lebanon or Yemen or any other country in the region. It's a role that perhaps the Biden administration could play in the future. And also, there's a recent development within Iran itself, if you will. The Iranian parliament just recently approved the uranium enrichment of to 20%. And as we all know, weaponizing uranium, it's much easier than once you pass that 20%. So it's around, I think, 90%, if I'm not mistaken, where it's become
of the
weaponized.
work. 90% of the work is once you reach 20, because from 20 to 90, it's a matter of weeks and you can reach the bomb.
Yeah, it facilitates and expedites this work tremendously. So with this development in Iran, what do you think the U.S. or the international system can do to engage Iran diplomatically along with the Arab Gulf states?
Well, the assassination is an additional complication. First of all, I mean, if you speak to Iranian, I spoke to many Iranian colleagues, they look at it very different than Qasem Soleimani, because Mr. Fakhrizadeh was not a combatant. He was a scientist and he was a civil servant who was serving his country. I have a colleague who said, I mean, he compared it to Pearl Harbor. There were like 60 operatives involved, and it's in the heartland of Iran. So they're very upset. This assassination created an ambiance of defiance. And you know, the parliament passed this law, and by February, if the sanctions are lifted, they're going to kick out the nuclear inspector and reach 20%. And February, you know, the president, you know, you have one president at a time in the US. Yeah. So Biden cannot promise anything, cannot negotiate anything unless he's sworn in, which is 20th of January. So 20th of January, and like in 10 days. So this makes things much more complicated to Mr. Biden to go back. Once they are like close to that, if they kick out the nuclear inspectors, that will make it very difficult. And you know, again, I'll speak again about Mr. Zarif in the Med 2020. He said, you know, we're not happy. The government is not happy about it, but you know, the parliament passed it, but this can be reversed. So what will Biden do? Will he rush to remove the sanctions without negotiating anything without negotiating any deal with Iran so he's in a very tough position. And again, also what's difficult, because you know the election on Iran are in June 2021, so it's like few months. He wouldn't want to take any action that will also lead to the rise of the hardliners. So he's in a tough spot First he won't have, I don't know how the election, the runoff in Georgia will come out. But if he doesn't have the support of the Congress, he has a very narrow margin, it will be difficult. It will be difficult. And you have also the sunset clause. The sunset clause is the time, just to explain it to our viewers, the sunset clause, the initial deal was say that Iran cannot enrich till 2025. But then after 2025, it can enrich as much as it can. I mean, it doesn't have to abide by the deal. So the clock is ticking because we are 2021. So also Biden is asking for an extension for the sunset clause. And Mr. Zarif was saying, no, sorry, we negotiated, we stayed 2 years to negotiate this deal. We're not going to renegotiate it. Either you go back to it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's there's, like we said before, there are challenges arising from almost every factor, every dimension, U.S. locally, Iranian locally, regionally, internationally. So it's a very convoluted situation. That's and also, like you also mentioned, there's a lot of timing involved in this ordeal as well, because you have Biden, who's going to be sworn in January. You have Iranian elections coming up. So there's a lot of strategic waiting, if you will, in order just to start moving the pieces on the board. So it's a very difficult situation. And before we open up to questions, I'd like to display the results of the poll. So if we could show that on the screen, please. The question was, should the Biden administration renew the Jcpoa? And yeah, we will close this polls right now so we can see the results. So wow, that's interesting. So 63% of our viewers believe that the Biden administration should renew the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So thank you for participating in this poll. For now, we have a couple questions. So I'll throw some at you, Daniel. But if you feel, I'm happy to jump in as you like. So we have one question from Sandeep. He's a well-known reporter in Bahrain for the Gulf Daily News. So he writes, what implications do you see in terms of the Abraham Accords that were recently signed between UAE, Bahrain, and Israel, and how this could affect any discussion with Iran? I think you alluded to it before, if I'm not mistaken.
It's, initially when the Abraham Accord were signed, Iran got on the defensive. They threatened Bahrain and they threatened UAE. And because they're scared that, that the Israeli will put a spying spot somewhere. But I mean, in the long run, listen, as we said, the Iranian regime is based on ideology. Yes. One of its main purpose is to liberate Palestine. Okay, so let's hope if these accords create some inroads in Israel, change the attitude inside Israel, because, change the attitude and change the attitude in the US, because, the Israeli always try to promote in the US that we are in a hostile environment. Netanyahu is known to say, if Israel if the Arab lay down their arms, there will be no war. If Israel lays down its arm, there will be no Israel. Now, I mean, the supporter of Israel in the US can see that this is not true. This is not a hostile environment. The Arabs are not hostile. And even people inside Israel can see that. Hopefully, if we have a real, whether it's to the Abraham Accord or because of the changing perception in the US, or because maybe Biden will put more pressure on Israel, or a change in Israel leadership, if we have, I'll just want to say something. If we have a fair and just solution for the Palestinian cause, if we have a two-state solution where the dignity of the average Palestinian, where his right for status is preserved, this can give a graceful exit to the Iranian regime. Because the Iranian regime will not give up on its ideology for just for some economic perk. That's why I think solving the Palestinian issue, it's at the core of solving to getting a grand bargain with Iran.
Yeah.
I think solving the Palestinian issue is at the core of getting a great bargain of Iran, because this will give Iran a graceful exit for its ideology. It can say, well, it can say, well, the revolution purpose have been achieved. You know, they cannot now, for 40 years, they've been advocated ideology. They cannot one day just say, okay, we changed our mind, we want to give it up. People would rise against them. They will tell them, you let us under sanction for 40 years just to give it up. So I think solving the Palestinian issues will open the door for a grand bargain with Iran.
And oftentimes also the Iranian regime also it pursues its ideology on the at the expense of its own people. We see a lot of homelessness in Tehran, counting in the millions. People are tired and hungry in the streets. So, and also we have Khamenei, who's also reaching a very advanced age as well. He's well above his 80s, and so there's another question of transition also within the Iranian political system as well. So this again adds another complication to the whole ordeal. We have another question as well from Araf Bijan. He just wants to ask about, is there a possibility between a confrontation between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and different US allies on one side against Iran about its nuclear, based on its nuclear program, and whether if the Middle East is moving towards a new security order during the Biden administration? What's your, do you have any take?
Well, what we have a front formation, yes, and this is the result of the American retrenchment. You know, the America, as much as people here in the region, they don't want to get America involved, but America had the role of something what we call an offshore balancer. You know, when Saddam Hussein tried to, invade Kuwait, America interfered and kept the balance between the different actors. So now with the retrenchment that started with Obama, now countries in the region are starting to form fronts. So yes, you have UAE, Bahrain, Saudi, and let's say Israel, and you have another front with Qatar, Turkey, and you have Iran with this proxy, and this makes it very dangerous. Again, I will go back to what I said before. How did the First World War come? Because of this front formation, then one assassination of a second-rate diplomat started the war. So yes, we are in a very dangerous situation because of this front, and we have front formation, and that's why we need America to play the role of the broker and give assurances to both parties, to both sides, in Iran and Saudi, to have a de-escalation and appeasement of tensions.
Absolutely. Also, there was a question that was posed from the audience. The Pentagon has ordered some troops to withdraw from the region, which raises fears because of a possible Iranian attack or from its influence. Do you think that the U.S. pulling out some of its troops is, do you think there's a legitimate threat from Iran on U.S. troops in the region?
Well, I don't think there is, it's not about that. I don't think now the Iranian will hit unless they are hit, unless they get a hit like, they've been really restrained. They, even when Soleimani was killed, they did hit, Ain al-Assad and but it was targeted. They made sure there was no one there because they didn't want, so they escalate the tension, but they keep it up to a limit not to go into a direct confrontation. You get my point? They don't want to drag Iran into a war. It's not in their interest. Yeah, but unless they are hit directly, that's I don't think the Iranian will hit, at least not directly, maybe through their proxies. You remember a year ago when they started hitting the 4 ships, commercial ships, they will not go directly and hit the US, I doubt, unless they are hit. But, as we said, the retrenchment is a policy that started in 2008 with Obama withdrawing prematurely from Iraq. Even Trump, he said we will reconcentrate our troops in Iraq in 3 locations. So that, and he withdrew from the Northeast of Syria. So the retrenchment is a trend. It started with Obama and it will continue with Biden. And it's a reaction to Bush's war. The American public doesn't want to see more of a soldier deployed.
They don't want, they're fatigued from this, if you will.
Yes,
Dania.
there is a fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely. And this fatigue also culminated, like you said, during the George W. Bush presidency during his second term. It cost a lot of American lives, and there was a general consensus that even politically, it was not viable for any candidate to support deploying troops abroad. So I think this trend will still resonate very much so in the United States for the not even beyond the Biden presidency as well. So this is going to be a trend that's going to occur for a long period of time in America. So we can see that.
But you know, the issue is, how can you have leverage if you don't have presence?
Exactly. It's always that
how
balance.
How can you have leverage if you don't have presence? It's very difficult to have leverage if you don't have presence. How can you call the shots if you're not there?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it takes a lot of strategic calculations from the U.S. and its allies in the region to sort of formulate a balance in order to meet these requirements. Well, if that's said, I think I'd like to close this session a little bit early. Or actually, we have one more question, I believe, coming in. So, yeah. Okay. So, just on as a concluding remark, we see that the Biden presidency has a lot of it very much wants to deliver on its campaign promise of renegotiating with Iran in the region, and it's definitely within something that he is striving for. And just to recap some of the different points that were mentioned, but we said there was a lot of constraints, both locally from the U.S. within determining the final 2 seats within the Senate, and as well as Iranian elections happening in June of next year, and as well as different regional players that want to be involved in the negotiation, if there will be any. And we can see also that that internationally, Iran has also, along with the certain European countries, have created their own mechanisms to circumvent sanctions. So this was not taken into consideration when President Trump elected to get out of the Jcpoa, and this is creating a new level of complication that the region has not seen for a while. But by far the biggest questions remaining on the table for the region is that Iran's missile programs and its influence of its regional proxies in the region that directly threaten the stability and security of the Arabian Gulf and beyond. It's something that's it's considered a threat for these countries, and they want to always try to solve these issues. Let's hope we will see actually what will happen with the Biden presidency and how things will develop during his term. Is there anything you'd like to add, Dania, before we close the session? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I would like to add is the US should really work on trust building measure between Saudi, the Arab Gulf countries and Iran. We have a lot of grievances, both of us, and we need to work on them. And unless we work on them, we'll not reach a conclusion. The Iranians are not our enemies. We don't think of them as our enemies. We have a shared history, we have shared geography, and we need to work together, and we need to live together in peace. And we have to work on our grievance. I know from Iranian colleagues, they have a lot of grievance that how Saudi and Arab Gulf funded Saddam Hussein for a 7-year war that really drained Iran, and they felt it's a not just war. But at the same time, we have also our grievance. Does Iran, for example, recognize Bahrain as an independent state? They still have a seat, in the parliament, an empty seat for Iran. Do they recognize for example, do they recognize that the king of Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the 2 holy mosques? We have a lot of grievances that we need really to solve. And this is where the US should work on trust building measures. And again, it takes 2 to tango. We have, the Arabs and the US really missed an opportunity with Khatami. Khatami was a philosopher. He thought about reinterpreting the Islamic Revolution. He said about accepting the Arab Peace Initiative. I mean, he would have been the best chance for Iran to open up and to be peaceful and to be, productive and cooperative member in the region. Now there are rumors that Jawad Zarif will be running. Yeah,
For the election,
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, for running for 2021. We should also not lose if we get this opportunity where we get a moderate, someone really moderate, who's really willing to have change, to conduct change in Iran. We should be at least show that the US, that they are really sincere in offering help for real change. And as I told you again, solving the Palestinian issue will pave the way, for having a grand deal with Iran, because the contention point will always be Israel. So solving the Palestinian issue will greatly help with this.
Will be very high on the agenda for sure. So again, thank you for your time, Danya. I really
Thank
appreciate
you for hosting me,
your
and thank you
time.
for Dirasat.
It's always been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll get you back again in Think Talks or in other events. And thank you to our audience who tuned in today. So be sure to follow Darasat at Instagram, Twitter, or wherever you follow your social media. And thank you again, Danya. And we look forward to any future events.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.